in the show.
Yes.
We are in the show. Good morning, good morning, good morning. God's great morning to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning, 3:16, and only as God would have it, that for God so loved the world that God gave. And I'll just end it right there. I am not going to name the person, but I am dedicating this episode to a loved one who just earned their wings. And so my heart is with you. My heart is with my family. And I don't think it's a coincidence or a happenstance that things would happen the way that they did on this morning. I'm excited to have join me my comrades in this whole journey to have this whole conversation about love, not hurting. And today's episode is talking about where is God, or to my sentiments this morning. God, what are you doing? What's really going on? What's this all about? And for all of the God questions that you might have, I'm not going to say that we have all of the answers, but we are certainly here to discuss this divine being that some of us consider. Some of us consider him. Some of us consider her. Some of us consider they. Some of us consider them. And we are here to talk about it all. My mother in ministry, a woman who has guided me for the past 25 plus years, and in my journey in faith and understanding God, especially in times of crisis, but beautifully in times of comfort and peace and love and joy and so many more things. My mother, Reverend Dr. Carolyn Habersham, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to my sister in ministry, that as God would have it, we would bump our heads together on a road to understanding and celebrating a woman in ministry, the late Reverend Jarena Lee, and fall in love almost immediately, and later find out that Reverend Carolyn Habersham is also her mother in ministry. So not only were we sisters in ministry, but we are sisters in ministry. So welcome to the one and only Dr. Tad, the Reverend Dr. Tawana Angela Davis.
Thank you, my beloved sister.
Yes, yes, yes. And bringing up the rear, our special guest this morning to join this conversation is the man behind what makes me look so good on camera all the time. You know, they always say that for every person who is up front, there's a crew of folks behind making that person look good. Well, that is what I call him, our video maestro, our IT maestro, our many multi-talented maestro, Mr. Josh Brazile. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming to the front of the camera today.
Yes, it's different. I'm not used to being on live on this screen. So, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, I was preparing for this conversation, and based on some work that Carrie's Touch, a breast cancer organization that I am the co-founder of, has done some research with Black women, particularly who are breast cancer survivors, and trying to understand God in the midst of their breast cancer journey. We have had some interesting findings of understanding God on a spectrum, from spirituality to spiritual to God to universe, are the ways that women have identified their relationship with God. And some people, that relationship is really, really good and solid. And other people, that relationship is very rocky and uncertain. And in some ways, through the voices of some people, harmful. So, as we open up this conversation around love shouldn't hurt, where is God? I want it to be a conversation. I'm not interviewing any of these people on this panel today. We are all in conversation, so we can all just chime in and we can talk. I do have some questions prepared to get us started, but I really want us to make this a conversation. So to get us started, let me start by defining who God is to me. I actually, if I give God a pronoun, it's they. And the reason that it is they is because I question and I interrogate the text and asking, if I am made in the likeness and the image of God, and I am assigned at birth as female, how is it that a person who is assigned at birth who is male also made in the same image and likeness of God? Now, I'm not associating any sexuality to God. I'm just saying if we use pronouns for God, I use they. I also accept the doctrine of Christianity from the perspective that I am a follower of Christ. I also say that, as a Black person, spirituality, as we get to know more information, becomes very complex. And I know that there are people that say, well, that's the white man's religion, or that's the white man's God. And they say that, with slavery, stripped us of everything but this false identity of this God who is a savior. So where I join this conversation and my perspective is, listen, I don't know if it's a white man's God or not, but what I do know is that God is real and how God shows up in my life. I accept and believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I believe that I have been called to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ through a lens of love and through a lens that God is bigger. So as we start this conversation, I invite each of you to just state your position on who God is in your life. And we'll start with you, Mother Carolyn.
Of course you would.
We can volley. We can volley. You can say pass. You the mother.
So after all of what you just gave, and thank you for that, when I refer to God, I just use the term God. I do not use a gender because I think God is much bigger than a gender. And so I just use the term God. Who God is to me, and I do understand those who talk about the white man's God. I understand where that comes from. And I understand that not understanding the history in its entirety will make someone believe that, and I get it. I get how we get there. I being born in God's image and accepting that I am in God's image, because I have to accept that first and then understand what does that mean to me. And what that means to me is we teach the Holy Spirit, God lives in us. But then we say, don't say anything about having any divinity. How can I not do that if God lives in me? And God is guiding me and talking to me from that. So I think that we have done a good job of confusing ourselves as well as everybody else. Sometimes about the personhood of God and the power of God. For me, I needed God to be God because I did not need God to be human.
Mm.
And assigning gender to God for me is doing it in a human form. I needed to be able to believe in and reach for something that is far greater than me. And I come to that by my own experiences in life, regardless of where life has taken me or where I've been. When I have the opportunity to look back, I know that I came out of things so many things that I could never have gotten myself out of. I know that I've come through so many things that I could never have brought myself through. I know that there were places where God showed up where I screwed up big time and made a conscious decision to screw up. And so when you say that, when I hear people say that God doesn't bless a mess, I have to pull back from that because I was a horrendous mess.
Mm,
And God blessed me in my mess
mm,
that I created myself.
mm,
And God still came through.
mhm,
And I wasn't looking for God, wasn't praying, wasn't thinking about God, and didn't even like God. And God still came through. So when I can look back on my life, I am real clear about what I believe and why I believe it. And I can listen to people say, it's the white man's got this, and I can hear that and not get upset
mhm.
because I understand where it comes from. Then my job is then to be able, for as much as I can, to gently teach
Mhm,
and help somebody connect that way.
mhm. Amen. Thank you. Josh.
Um, hmm. It's I think my journey with God and religion, it's been a winding one. When I was very young, I grew up like a lot of Black people. I grew up in a Christian. I grew up in a Christian family. Um, there wasn't any imposed religion in my household, and I grew up with my aunt. There wasn't really. She was more spiritual. She was searching. She wasn't a super fan of organized religion, and I think there are a lot of us out there that aren't because of some of the things that have been brought up already, which is some of the damage that's been done by people who abuse
Mhm,
and get lost in the sauce, and they're looking for personal glory and fame and money, um, and so use what's supposed to bring people joy. They use it as a tool for manipulation, and those are the kind of things that I came up with personally. So I had a family that was very religious, um, and I just found myself I didn't believe. And when I learned the term atheist, I was like, I'm that. I don't believe there's a God. I don't believe there's an afterlife. I believe you die, you die. But then I became a teenager, and teenagers know, I'm trying not to curse, teenagers know everything, don't they? Don't they? You just know everything. You got every answer to every question. So as a teenager, I was nothing. You can't tell me any different. It was very bad, and I would come for people, and your religious beliefs are trash, and that. And then I became an adult, and I kind of settled down. Kind of took my head out my butt, um, and somewhere along the way, spirituality and the feeling, the term I use is universe. So I guess I interchange God. I just switch out universe, and it's like, what does universe bring? I started feeling this connection with other people. Now I can't say the I guess the structure in which people invoke God, but I feel that there's more. And I started to feel that there was more, and I started to study more certain religions and stuff, and this feeling of community and giving back and forth on the human level, and what we give and receive with one another. And then how weird things align in the universe, things that happen in your life, for instance, and you go, oh, that's terrible.
right.
But then something good comes out of it, and you go, oh, well, that's interesting. Would
Mm,
that have happened if I didn't have to struggle through this? Would I have gotten this over here? So I don't know. I now find myself in this place of more acceptance, more, I'm not here for the proselytizing and the Bible shaking. Now, you don't go to hell because you believe it. You gay and you no. Okay, really. I don't like the image of small God. I think I've said to multiple people, if we're going to talk about God and we're going to say God is real, God's got to be huge. God's got to be a full symphony orchestra, thousands of players. It's got to be huge. It can't be this limited. I'm watching what you do. Ooh, you said something over there, so punishment. Like, really?
Right.
So that's sort of where I sit now.
Can somebody pass the offering plate? Yes. Can somebody pass the offering plate? And thank you, Josh, for being here and for being another side of this conversation, because I'm sure people saw that this conversation's coming up and it's going to be all Pollyanna and all, packaged beautifully in a bow with a box and telling people that they should love God because God loves them. And we are here to wrestle with the conversation in its entirety. Bringing up the rear, Dr. Tad.
I feel like I've just been set up. Like, wow. So everything that was said prior, totally affirm, acknowledge, I see you, I honor the words and the stance and your presence on today. And if I could summarize where I stand today as it relates to my beliefs, my spirituality, the way I show up in the world, it has definitely evolved from this Western view of Christianity, this narcissistic, individualistic, only one way, believing that, one knows what God is thinking, what God is saying, and this is how you are going to be punished. And it's very white. It's very non-communal. It is very oppressive. It marginalizes, it disrespects, it dehumanizes. And that's what I grew up on. And experiencing it for myself as a Black woman who was called to ministry and dealing with misogynoir, which is a disdain for Black women, realizing patriarchy exists. I had to, from a womanist stance, not as a label, but as a womanist prowess, as one who looks to oneself for one's own liberation. I look to my own culture beyond the realm of Western Christianity, rooting back to African traditional religion, as you alluded to, Tam, like everything didn't start or stop when we were kidnapped and arrived on these shores. So my evolution has now become what Josh described as bigger. I know that I am human and divine because I am made in the image and likeness of God, who is universal, who is many things, who is the universe, who the sun and stars and moon just follows its assignment. And that's where I am called to follow my assignment as it relates to not only being an individual, but a part of a community, being very communal, not the worship of the written word, which is very white, looking at the context, seeing God in the midst of my breast cancer diagnosis, seeing God in the midst of being a domestic violence survivor, or seeing God even in the midst of a domestic violence relationship. Not that God gave me all of these things to teach me a lesson, because I truly believe, Josh, that God is bigger and greater and wiser and better than to give me a designated challenge so that I can learn a lesson. No, but the beauty of it is, in the midst of the worldly ish that we have to go through and the societal ills, I can look to a God to help me to learn, to bring me through, to heal me, to perform miraculous duties, and do so in a way where I don't just look at Christianity, I look at Buddhist practices, I look at Islamic practices, I look at universal practices, I look at astrology, I look at medicine, I look at science, I look at all of these things as being rooted and centered in God, who is the power and the source behind all that we do and all that we are called to. So that's where I have evolved over my 54 years of life, and opening myself to who God is and how God is deliverer, sustainer, protector, provider, healer, all of these things to move us closer to God and move us closer to one another.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation to all of you. Yeah, and wow. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives on God. And as you were each speaking, I was starting to think about, I was excited to have Josh to be a different voice in the conversation, but I now wish I actually had someone who was of a more conservative belief and perspective around God to help round out the conversation even more. But that's not how God wanted it, because God said, let's free the people on this here, for God so loved the world Saturday. So I want to talk about anger. This platform is typically addressing domestic violence or intimate partner violence as a way to honor my mom's journey, Carrie, who is the namesake of Carrie's Touch, and the journey of domestic and intimate partner violence survivors, such as Dr. Tad, who is on this call as well. So let's talk about violence around God. Starting with, have you ever been angry with God? And if so, how did you navigate that space? That question is open for anybody to respond.
I'm gonna go first this time, because y'all not about to set me up again. That's not happening. But Mother, I heard you start speaking, so I will yield to the sage in the room.
No, go ahead.
So yes, I have been angry, and I was angry at different phases in my life. I was angry because it was rooted in a place of ignorance, lack, unknown, blame, shame, guilt. It was rooted in all of those things that did not serve me well. Now, my anger is then honoring my feelings, feeling all the feels that God has given me, anger, sadness, happiness, joy, and everything in between, honoring that feeling, and then asking myself, how am I to respond that is going to stay true to who I am and true to what I believe, as far as a communal prowess for supporting, advocating, building community, rooted in love, where it may not necessarily, the intention is not to hurt you, but if that hurt happens for you to learn a lesson, to shake you up, to wake you up. And this is not a blanket statement. Let me add a disclaimer. People hurt you in domestic violence. That is not something like, oh, learn the lesson. No, not at all. Let us not misconstrue that. What I am saying is that God is in the midst of that. And in my anger and disgust or frustration, or even asking why, because we're told not to question growing up, we were told not to question God. I truly believe that God desires our questions, that God desires our curiosity, that God desires our inquisitiveness so that we can grow closer to God and to receive the answers from the source versus our limited beliefs and rooted in deficit and things that don't serve us well. So whiteness doesn't want you to feel. In our African prowess, our Blackness, we are to feel all the feels and then use them accordingly so that we can grow and grow together and heal and do the things that we were called to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to chime in and ask a follow-up question to you specifically about, so what about those who have not who have had a different journey than you and still see potentially God and or organized religion as the enemy and people of God? There are people out there that hate us because we are preachers of the gospel. You know, what would you say to that person?
I would say, and it's a journey,
Of course,
of learning to love self and realizing that no matter your situation or circumstance, that God lives in you and you have an opportunity to be grateful for the things, not comparing yourself to others. But if there were times when I was bedridden, couldn't bathe myself, couldn't feed myself, and I was still grateful to God because I lived in an area where I was able to watch the sunrise every morning. So it's really learning to define what healing is, what wellness is. When you talk about it is well with my soul, no, I may have aches and pains in my body, but I am in control of my beliefs and how I can shift the narrative of what I was taught. Like healing has this one definition. No, I get to define that. I get to choose that with my body. I get to choose if I am going to be on chemotherapy and lose my hair. And, you know, I get to choose these things. So really encouraging people to love themselves beyond these definitions or these labels that societal ills have now caused us to live out, and to be able to reconcile that. And it takes work, it takes community, it takes venting, it takes talking about it, prayer, meditation, so that you can shift the narrative that unfortunately has been indoctrinated in us for so long since being in this nation.
Wow. Thank you. Anybody else? Have you been angry with God? Okay, go ahead.
God. Yeah, how many times? First of all, growing up, never having the permission to be angry with God, never having the permission to question, never having the permission to be sad or anything like that. So when I was going through breast cancer and feeling like I've been pastoring, I have been doing these things, I have been living for God, I've turned my life around, and now I got breast cancer. And not only do I have breast cancer, I don't have health insurance, so I'm not even being treated like a human being. And they are about to do a surgery on me that is going to forever alter my body. Yeah, you think I had nice things to say to God? Not at all. But it was in that rage and that anger and that disappointment and that crying all the time that broke me enough to realize that the God I had been taught didn't even exist. Like the God I've been preaching about and the God I've been serving, that was a fairy tale. And so it broke me enough to understand that not only was I going to be introduced to the God who really loved me and understood what love was and helped me to understand what love is, but I was going to have to go further than that. and begin to shift my theological stance, and begin to shift what I taught, and begin to shift what I preach. Because I got introduced to a God who met me at the bottom of my place, crying and about to have a major surgery that I was not going to be able to reconcile myself with, just so I could live. And so now I am not only angry with this God, but I'm looking to this God that I'm angry with to help me through. And it was that God that showed up in the midst of that darkness with a light that I hope I never ever forget. That began to not only shift my life before the surgery shifted my life, but would shift my life in my being to become inquisitive enough to learn so that I could unlearn all that I had learned. I could be open enough to understand that there was far more life and far more love and far more healing than I could ever imagine. Was healing offered to me? Yes. Did I have surgery? Yes. Was it a radical surgery? Yes. I would lose both my breasts. I would and not have an opportunity for reconstruction. I was going to have to live with that for the rest of my life. And that was the day I can go back and know that God was going to teach me what living really was. And so it was in that process, in my rage and my anger and my disappointment and my hurt, that I met love that changed my life. And so I would have more cancer after that. I would have more trauma after that. And all of those things, no, God did not orchestrate them. Life shows up. And life shows up in breast cancer. It shows up in other cancers. It shows up in other illnesses. It shows up, and I'm still dealing, and yet I'm still loving. But I had to learn that everything I had been taught, not because people were trying to teach me wrong, they gave me what they had to give me.
Right.
And that's where we have to be able to reconcile. Folk taught us what they had to teach us. But life, if we allow it to, will show up in our dark places. And God will slip in and say, I am here. And show us how to love from that place. So yes, and even with that, this past Monday, I had an experience. And I've been going through a lot of experiences here lately. And on Monday, I had an experience that broke me down. And I'm like, I love you, but you and I got to talk because I am about through with this. So I love the fact that what God has taught me is that I can be honest with God. And so, yes, I can still say, I don't like what's going on here. I can still say that, and I can be okay with it because I know that the one who is the lover of my soul responds because I'm being honest. And it is in that honesty that I can then sit back and go, all right, you got to help me through this, but I'm going to be stomping my feet every step of the way. And I'm okay. I can do that. I can be okay. I don't have to be what everybody thinks I ought to be. And yet in the midst of my saying, I'm not okay with you, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you and I know you love me. And it's okay for me not to be okay with what's going on right now. But I don't give up. I give in to the love.
Wow.
So I never played the devil's advocate. I definitely don't want to do that, but I do want to present the other side. So what do you say to the person that says, that's hogwash? That ain't never happened for me. I've been crying out to God my whole life, and God ain't never done nothing for me. I've done it on my own. I'm the one that gets up and makes it happen every single day. And I still don't have enough to make ends meet. And so, yeah, you can reconcile and be all in love with God, but that ain't my story.
Right. And it wasn't always mine. And so what I allow people to do is to be there. I'm just going to be there lovingly with you. I'm not going to try to tell you, well, how could you say that? Because the sun came up today and there's trees and you ought to be able to see God. No, I'm going to sit there with you in it. And I'm going to lovingly walk with you in it. And I'm not going to tell you that you are wrong for what you feel. I get it. I've been there. And just like God met me, I'm going to be silently praying with you because I know God's going to meet you. And so it's not up to me to change you. It's not up to me to say that you are wrong for what you feel. But it is up to me to listen in love. And it is up to me to be praying while you are speaking, asking the Holy Spirit to use me to help you heal, whatever that is. And sometimes it's to do nothing but let you be and to know that I am here with you and I'm walking with you in this and I'm just with you. I'm not walking away from you because you're not talking about my God like I need you to talk about my God. No. Because see, it's never been, God never called me to defend God.
Right.
I can't defend God. God can defend God's self. I was never called to do that. I'm called to love God and let that love shine through me and let it be a magnet. But I'm not called to defend God. That's God's job.
Right. Mr. Brazile, have you ever been angry with God?
Yes. And it was when I was being introduced to Christianity. Um, I, um, I've said it a million times. I was raised by my aunt. One aunt out of two. One out of three sisters, and I didn't have much. I didn't have organized religion in our home. It was spirituality, and my aunt didn't put anything on me. There was no force of you need to read this, you need to do that. It just wasn't there. She believed there is a God, that there's more out there. There has to be more. Things happened in her life that she felt God's presence, but the organized religion aspect was never. That was never paramount in our home, and I. She went to. She's an opera singer, and she went to Europe to do some performing, and so I had to stay with another aunt, one of her sisters, and that aunt, very religious, very Christian, Bible stacked up above her headboard in her bedroom. That aunt decided that I didn't have religion, that I didn't have what I needed to have. She had me. I was baptized while my other aunt was in Europe. I was baptized, and then she started my Christian education. She would read things to me from the Bible and make me. It was a whole process, and it was alien to me. I hadn't had it before, so I was starting from zero. And she was telling me things. God's everywhere, and God sees you, and God hears all your thoughts and stuff, and be careful, and a lot of the scary stuff. Ooh, don't think this, and you can't, and also you can't ask why, you shouldn't question God's will, and all of that. And at that point in my childhood, there were things, there weren't great things. I had issues. My mother wasn't around, and I had questions about that. Why isn't my mother around? Does she not care about me? What's going on there? There were other things in my childhood that were not so great, that had happened, that weighed on me. They weren't pleasant things. And it was like, well, if there's, the way she built up God, it was like, well, if God knows all that, then like, why do these terrible things happen? Why do these terrible things happen to me, and God's all around, and I should pray and all of that? And so very quickly I was introduced to religion, and then at some point I just internally I was like, it's a bunch of hokum, and I'm not here for it. And so I threw it away. Because I can't ask questions. Like, even when I would ask this particular aunt, like, well, why the bad thing? Well, it's God's will. What's gonna happen? It's gonna happen. Wow. Okay. So what? I don't want to be a part of that. That doesn't feel good. That feels horrible. I don't want any part of that. And so I threw it, as soon as it was given to me, I threw it away. And I guess it went from anger to just disbelief or non-belief. And it wasn't until I went through, like I said in the beginning, I went through the deep atheist stage of, God's not real, and trying to bring people up out of there. Like, anytime they talked about their religion, like, no, here's why you're wrong. And it really wasn't until I started working on my own mental health and realizing I have everything to fix. I'm not doing well. I'm breaking down all the time. Going through forgiving a lot of stuff out of the past and things that happen. It's like, you gotta let that go. You gotta forgive them. You gotta see where they were at that time, why they did things to you. You gotta let that go. But that feeling of contentedness, it started there, and looking up and trying to understand, well, what is contentment? How can you be in a bad situation but be content? And that started me on a journey of looking east and looking in different ways of thinking about God and the universe. And that started to bring me more peace, and thinking, well, as both Ramsey and Tawana have said, it's not the bad things that happen to you, they're not punishments. Life happens. And in that, there's good that does come out of the universe. There are things that come out of the universe. You can call them blessings. You can call them. So once I started feeling that and feeling more connected to that, that's where I was like, well, I'm more open to, the wonderful things that come out of the universe, the wonderful things that happen when people connect. And so it grew. But I started from a place of being very angry.
Wow. Thank you. Response, Mother Carolyn, Dr. Tad?
I love what Josh just did. I just love the explanation and the coming about. Those of us who have been called to preach, myself, I don't preach the way I used to preach.
Mm-hmm.
I understood that what I was preaching was what I had been taught. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching the way what I had been taught. And then life shows up. The old folk used to say, just keep living,
Mm.
and life will show up, and it will force us, if we are open, to research and dig and do within our own self.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love the way, I think in all of us, it has been that dark place has brought us to a place of light, that place of anger, that place of rage. So rage obviously has its place, anger has its place, and it brings us into these places with God. When I just think about how I used to say to God, if you know everything, and if you are everywhere, and if you are always with me, can you explain to me why I got raped as a child? Were you watching?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Were you letting that go?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I had to process
Mm-hmm.
in a real way, not in the, well, you know, God is good and God just was testing you to see if you were stronger through it. That is not the God I serve.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Or, well, what are you doing wrong that you keep getting cancer? You know, maybe it's what you're eating. Maybe you need to look at what you're eating. Maybe you need to really think about what you're doing in your life. Because why is God always punishing you? You know, those are the messages that we send.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people give it back to me, I understand where it comes from. And I understand the ignorance behind that, particularly when it is people who have been in church all their life, and they have been serving God all their life. And like I heard a woman say, the only people who get sick are people who are living in sin.
I was gonna say the church folks 90% of the times are the worst one. They some of the meanest people you will run into. They are some of the most judgmental folks that you will run into. They are some of the most hellfire and brimstone folks that you will run into. They are some of the most homophobic folks that you'll run into, and we can keep on down the line with the phobias and the issues that church folk.
Right. Because that's what that's the way we've been taught to understand the written word.
Mm,
Because what we forget is when we take history out of things,
mm-hmm.
everything gets skewed.
Right.
And so we forget that we were taught how to teach the word by people who didn't even think we were human beings.
Well,
And they said that God said, this is the place where you belong
mhm.
because you're a you're people who are cursed. You know how you got cursed because Noah had a white son and a black son. That's how you got cursed. Nobody ever questions how did Noah have a white son and a black son, right? But because it was being taught from the perspective that if we tell you that God said to keep you down and we teach you the word through this lens, then you will understand that you are always supposed to be a slave. You
Mm,
are always supposed to be beneath us. And so we incorporated that, and we took it because that's what we knew.
mm,
Except our ancestors knew something different
mm.
because they could stay in the field from can't see to can't see, getting beat, and still go out into the bush and praise God.
I just wrote because I met God in the field. So,
Right.
right, right. They met God in the
In the
bushes.
field. And would go out and put pots over their heads so
Mm-hmm.
that nobody could hear them praising God. But it was in their bones, they had to praise God. So we know that the God that they brought from Africa was not the God that they met in America.
Come on.
Which was why they rebelled continuously.
Right.
And so even when it was mandated that a white preacher had to come and tell them about why they were supposed to be slaves, they sat there, they listened, and then they went to the bush.
Yes.
And praised the God that they brought with them from Africa. So when people talk about this white man's God, it's because they don't understand the history of who we are. See, we do know the Garden of Eden was in Africa. We do know that.
Some of us, not everybody. Some of us.
No.
Right.
Listen, we don't agree on baptism. We don't agree on salvation. We don't agree on whether God's man or female. We don't agree on those things. But archaeologists, scientists, and others have now all had to come to agreement. The Garden of Eden was in Africa. So if God was intentional about starting the Garden of Eden where the Black Africans lived, it meant that we were always a part of God's plan. That's the God that our ancestors knew in Africa, which was why they couldn't be stripped of it, even being beat day in and day out and told that they were not even a full human being. And they would say, that's what you say, but the God I met in Africa is a different God. That was the God that was brought here, got askew when we started accepting what was being taught in the way it was being taught. But then I think of Howard Thurman's grandmother, who would say to him, I can't read, but don't read that
Don't
part.
put that part. Don't read Paul. Don't do that part. No.
Because that's not the God I know.
Right.
And so we are now being brought back in after this pandemic to be authentically who we are. Some people will continue to teach that you are sick because you have sinned. Some people will continue to do that. But I believe that there are more of us who will teach the theology of love. And the theology of love doesn't care whether you are him, she, her, they, we, whatever, but that you are a human being blessed by God to be given breath. And my job and my assignment is to love you for who you are, not for who you sleep with. Because if I can only love you for who you sleep with, and that's the gospel that I'm going to preach, then make sure that you sleeping with the one you're supposed to sleep with and don't be up there preaching. If that's the real gospel. But it's I'm going to love you in the midst of the mistakes that you make. I'm going to love you for who you are. And who that you love is not my business, because you are just loving. And loving is what we've been called to do.
Wow.
I'm sorry. May I just, one thing that Josh said, and Mother, thank you for your wisdom and your truth telling. Just going back for a bit, Josh's story resonated with me because Josh started in a space of anger where things were imposed, and what I heard, and correct me if I'm not on the right path, Josh wasn't seen, Josh wasn't honored, Josh wasn't recognized for just his humanity in that moment, and having things imposed, and religion in this case being one of them, and still having this, lack of foundation, if you will, that conformed to what the aunt was trying to teach. And I appreciated how you started in anger, but then that divine prowess in you, in alignment with the universe, was able to help you to evolve, even in the midst of a quest for mental health, even in the midst of a quest for who am I turning to as this bigger being that may have answers, that may have reconciliation, that may have healing, that may have power, that may have guidance. I don't know what to call it, and I can't really put my finger on it, but I know that I can't stay stuck in this anger. And so finding a way to honor yourself when other people didn't honor your voice and your stance and your questions, I appreciate your strength, your tenacity, and your love for yourself and the universe to say, something's not right. And Tam, I think that what you were asking, how do people get to that point? Mm-hmm. It's being able to have the courage to say, wait a minute, let me regroup. Let me center myself. Let me honor myself. Let me hear myself. Let me honor myself as a human being, and then move forward. And the law of attraction then hopefully will come into play, because the things that we do, it is what it is. It's not good or bad, right? It is what it is. So Josh, you took that anger and you said, this is what it is. And this is how I am going to interpret it and move forward so that I can fully live out my humanity. So thank you for your story and for your honesty. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I couldn't have articulated that nearly that well. I mean, that was absolutely brilliant. So thank you for that. The thing I was thinking with your summation and with what Rev C was saying, there's an expression from the church I cannot stand. My partner and I hate it. My partner also grew up in a very religious household, and he had to come out of that and realize and open up and realize there was more. You know, God's bigger for him. He believes there's more out there, but that God is bigger than the narrow-mindedness of what he came up in. And he also understands that's what they had and that's where they were. They weren't trying to intentionally be something. That was what they knew, and that was how they communicated it. And I should say, the aunt that was teaching me religion, I don't think she was trying to harm me. That's just how she connected to the religion. And she was trying to give it, if this is part of the work that I had to go back and do, why do people do things? She was trying to give it because she wanted to give me something that could potentially bring me salvation and bring me things when life does get hard. Here's where you can go. You can go to God and say, well, I need help. So she wasn't trying to damage me, but still and yet. There was like, well, that's not really working for me. But there's an expression that my partner and I cannot stand, and it is, you ask a churchy Christian person, how are you doing? Oh, I am blessed and highly favored. Now, that I understand that's intended to be positive. I feel blessed. I feel highly favored. But to my ears, it always rings as highly exclusionary. I'm blessed. I'm favored? Well, why are you favored? There are plenty of other people here that need salvation, that need help, that need strength, that need to be given strength just to get up in the morning. Favored? Blessed, yes. Favored? It always rings wrong. And my partner hates it too. Because it always feels like it's a part of that. The church I grew up in was cliquish, and I think a lot of churches have that. There were cliques and these people over here. And it always felt like this sort of cliquey thing. We're favored. And it speaks to that, oh, well, you get sick because you're doing wrong. Well, this happened in your life. See, God don't like ugly. Really? So I'm because I made a mistake because I'm human. And you're saying we're talking about God. This is who I was, his image and all of that. And I'm a human and I make mistakes because I'm not infallible. But then I'm punished, right? And then if you go with my community, with the gay community, the LGBTQ plus community, we'll see you out there doing that stuff. That's why you got the AIDS. That's why you got this. That's why you got that. Okay.
You better tell it, Josh.
Yeah.
Wow, 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 wow. I mean, as always, we get to these conversations, and before we know it, our hour has passed, and we are just really starting to get warmed up. And that's when it's like, oh man, we gotta have a part two, because of where the conversation is. And I think that there is still so much more conversation that speaks to the fact that God is bigger. There's no way we would be able to have such an in-depth conversation over the span of 60 minutes and it be complete and tied up in a bow and all pretty.
Yeah.
Christianity, faith, spirituality is messy and it's complex and it is an ever-evolving experience. And so some of my notes that I just took is intent over impact for our next conversation and punishment versus favor. Because I like it, because I do have a response to Josh with the question about favor, but we're going to leave it for now because it's too big and the question, and then y'all will be firing, and it's good. That's what we want. It's what we want, but it's a good place for us to start. What we hope is that we don't take 3 months to come back to you. We hope that we get to see y'all again next month to continue this conversation. I really would like to do Love Shouldn't Hurt, Where is God? Because I think we're just now actually starting to get into the hurt.
Yes.
The first 45 minutes, we were into the love. And now we're starting to peel back the layers of the onion and getting into the hurt. And I think, in our next conversation, intent versus impact and punishment versus favor will definitely keep us going with that. I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds for your final thoughts. And I'm not going to say who's going to go first. Somebody just speak. 60 seconds, your final thoughts.
I'll take the jump. I'll take the bite this time. I'll try to keep it brief. I just have to say this was incredible. I was nervous. I've got 3 reverends here with me, and I'm this non-religious university mixy plixy wherever I'm at. I think it's been an incredible conversation, and I cannot wait to continue it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll go next. Yes, we are just diving into the hurt and truly invite beloveds into this conversation, because toward the end of this conversation, my eyes got a little teary-eyed because I looked at my kafaya. I'm thinking about Palestine. I'm thinking about what's happening in Haiti right now. I'm thinking about what's happening in this nation. And where is God? And that's a question. That is a question out of love and my faith, and a valid question that we are called collectively, not only to answer with lip service, but with our hands, with our service, with our hearts, with our souls. So I look forward to delving into this conversation even deeper. Thank you, Tam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tam. Thank you for daring to put a topic together that says love shouldn't hurt and where is God in the midst of hurt. It is the one thing that in the Christian community we dodge all the time, trying not to talk about it, trying not to deal with the tough conversations, and yet those are the conversations that free. Thank you, Josh, for bringing all of you to this moment. And yes, with 3 preachers on, thank you for being that voice that says, this is where I started and this is how I got to where I am today. And no, I didn't come up like they did. And this is how I got to where I am today. And to those who are listening, in the midst of everything, there is hope. There is love. There is peace. And my prayer is that you get it today. That God stops by in the midst of all of it and shows up.
And I can attest, it does. It truly does. It falls out of the sky from nowhere often when you least expect it.
Yeah. Whew. And we'll probably have to definitely have a part 3, because thank you, sister, for bringing up Palestine and the Congo and Haiti and all of the other places where active genocide is happening. And, you know, war is a very complex topic in the Bible, period. And that could be an entire special edition 2-hour mini series for a week. But I don't say that lightly. I say that because there is a lot of pain in the world.
Right.
And some of the pain we can't explain. And some of the pain we don't have answers to, other than love.
Right.
And without love, there is no God. So if you can't reconcile and meet God, find love. Find love.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening, and we will see you again soon.
Ashe.